Lorne Whitaker didn't even look up when she walked in. He was hunched over his mahogany desk on the 34th floor of the Wentworth Financial Tower in downtown Toronto, papers scattered everywhere, the kind of mess that only happens when a man has stopped caring about appearances. His jacket was on the floor. His tie was loosened to the second button. On the credenza behind him, a glass of scotch sat untouched, going warm. $43 million. Gone. Moved through shell accounts in a web so clean, it almost looked legal. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that he thought he knew exactly who did it. Darlene Osei knocked twice at the open door, mop handle in her left hand, cart parked out in the hallway behind her. It was 11:22 at night. The floor was empty. It was always empty by now. Get out. Lorne's voice came from somewhere low in his chest, rough, like he'd been talking to himself for hours, or maybe not talking at all. I said get out. Darlene didn't leave. She'd worked the overnight maintenance shift at Wentworth for 9 years. She knew this floor the way a person knows a house they grew up in. Every light switch, every creaky board, every executive who stayed late and why. Lorne Whitaker was never here past 7:30. Never. 9 years, not once. She pushed the door open another few inches. The smell hit her first. Coffee, hours old, and under it something sharper. The scotch, maybe. Or just the particular smell of a man coming apart. Sir, she kept her voice level. I'm sorry, I just saw the light, Lorne laughed. It wasn't a good sound. $43 million, and I'm sitting here like an idiot who trusted the wrong person for 12 years. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. 12 years, Darlene. He didn't know her name. He'd never once looked at her long enough to read her badge. But she let it go. Her eyes moved across the desk the way they always did. Automatic. 9 years of cleaning offices at 11 at night, you see things people forget you can see. Resignation letters, expense reports with numbers that don't add up, love letters to people who aren't spouses. Darlene had seen all of it and never said a word to anyone. But tonight was different. The documents spread across Lorne's desk were financial reconciliation reports, wire transfer authorizations on the left, compliance verification forms on the right. Darlene's gaze moved across them the way water moves across a surface, quiet, even, finding every low point. The account codes on the wire authorizations didn't match the correspondent bank identifiers on the compliance forms, not by much. 4 digits, but 4 digits on a wire transfer authorization isn't a typo. It's a door someone built into the system, a door only one person would need. She almost said something right then. Almost. A voice came from the hallway behind her. What exactly is going on here? Victor Gauthier, Chief Operating Officer, Lorne Whitaker's second-in-command and closest confidant for 12 years. His suit was still perfect at 11:30 at night. Charcoal gray, not a crease out of place. The kind of man who ironed his shirts before interviews even when no one was watching. His cologne arrived before he did. Something cedar and cold. He walked toward Darlene with the particular kind of authority that has never once been questioned. Chin level, shoulders back, every footstep landing like it owned the floor. This is a restricted area. He said it to the air, not to Darlene directly, like she was a piece of furniture that had moved itself to an inconvenient location. Why is maintenance on this floor unsupervised at this hour? Victor. Lorne looked up from his desk. It's fine. She was just checking if it isn't fine. Victor cut him off, smooth as anything, the way a man cuts off another man when he's decided he's the one in charge of the room. He stepped closer to Darlene, close enough that she could see the capillaries in his eyes, could smell something under the cologne. Not cedar, something older, bourbon, maybe, and something else. Something that smelled like a person who had already decided how this evening was going to end. Do you have clearance to be on this floor? I have my building pass. Darlene kept her voice even. Same as every other night. Your building pass doesn't give you access to executive financial documents. Victor reached for his phone. Security. Yes. 34th floor. I need 2 officers now. He looked at Darlene without looking at her. Empty your pockets, please. Darlene felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear. She'd been through too much for it to be fear. It was recognition. The feeling of a road you've been down before, a long time ago, in a different life, and you'd hoped you'd never find yourself back on it. She looked at Lorne. Lorne looked at his desk. That was the moment. That small, private moment where a man who could have said something chose instead to study the grain of his own mahogany. Darlene had been in rooms like this before. She knew what that particular silence meant. She reached into her pockets, slowly. Right side first. Her phone, a 6-year-old Samsung with a crack across the bottom corner of the screen. Her key card, her locker key, left side. A travel-worn paperback, its spine cracked halfway through. The Wealthy Barber by David Chilton. She'd read it 4 times. The pages were soft at the corners, the way pages get when they've been handled by someone who takes books seriously. It landed on the carpet with a soft sound when she pulled it out. One of the security officers picked it up, looked at the cover, looked at Victor. Victor smirked. He actually smirked. "Planning your retirement, are we?" Darlene said nothing. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes stayed level. She'd learned a long time ago that responding to a man like Victor Gauthier was exactly what a man like Victor Gauthier wanted. "Check the cart." Victor waved a hand. The officers moved to the hallway. They found cleaning solution, microfiber cloths, a thermos of tea, an extra pair of rubber gloves. Nothing else. Victor wasn't satisfied. He wouldn't be. This was never about what was on the cart. "I want an incident report filed," he told the officers. "Unauthorized presence in a restricted area. Potential breach of confidential financial materials." He turned to Darlene without making eye contact. "You can collect your things on Monday. Through HR. Just like that." 9 years, and it ended in 30 seconds on a Tuesday night because she'd pushed open a door she'd pushed open 900 times before. The officers walked her to the service elevator, one on each side, like she was a risk that needed to be contained. Like a woman with a mop and a David Chilton paperback was a threat to national security. They reached the elevator. The doors opened. Darlene stepped in, turned around, and looked past the officers, past Victor, straight at Lorne Whitaker standing at the far end of the hallway. His face was unreadable. Or maybe it was too readable, and he knew it. Her voice was quiet, steady. The voice of someone who has waited a long time to say the right thing at exactly the right moment. "Check the correspondent bank identifiers, Mr. Whitaker. On the wire authorizations, they don't match the compliance forms. All of them. Not one." The doors closed. Victor's smirk disappeared for just a second. A flicker. Then it came back. The hell was that about? Lorne didn't answer. He was staring at the place where the elevator doors had been, the janitor's words moving through him like something cold finding its way into warm water. Correspondent bank identifiers. How would a maintenance worker know what a correspondent bank identifier was? Victor clapped him on the shoulder. "Get some sleep, Lorne. I'll have a statement ready for the board in the morning." He said it like a man who has already written the ending and is just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Lorne nodded, but he didn't leave. He walked back to his desk, sat down, rolled up his sleeves, and turned to page 1 of the reconciliation report. For the first time in 4 months, he looked at the numbers without Spencer's voice in his ear, explaining what they meant. Without Victor's voice, he corrected himself. Victor, not Spencer. It was always Victor's voice in his ear. The Wentworth Financial Tower was quiet in the way that only a building gets at midnight. A particular silence that belongs to the building itself, not to any of the people passing through it. Outside, University Avenue moved the way it always moved. Headlights, the distant sound of the King Street streetcar, the low ambient hum of a city that doesn't fully go dark. Lorne pulled the wire transfer authorizations to the center of his desk. Page 9. The first transfer, Pinnacle Meridian Holdings, incorporated in New Brunswick 6 weeks before the initial movement of funds. He'd seen this document a dozen times. Victor had walked him through it personally. Here's where the irregularities start. Here's the employee access log. See the ID. That's Kevin Addo, junior reconciliation analyst. 24 years old, 2 years with the firm. Lorne had believed every word. He looked at the page now without Victor standing next to him. Every wire transfer over $250,000 required dual authorization. The requesting officer's signature and the COO's. Victor's signature was on everyone. That was his job. That was the system. But the correspondent bank identifiers on the wire authorizations didn't match the identifiers filed with compliance. Not on one transfer. On 22 transfers. Someone had manually entered the correct routing data into the wire system while filing different identifiers with the compliance office. The internal reconciliation process wouldn't flag it because the compliance forms would show clean numbers that matched nothing suspicious. The wire would move, the compliance audit would see nothing unusual, and the money would arrive somewhere the compliance forms never pointed to. Lorne pulled both documents side by side. Wire authorization, SIFT 7734 BNS. Compliance form, SIFT 773 BNS. 4 characters off, on 22 transfers. His hands had gone cold without him noticing. Only 2 people in Wentworth Financial had the system authorization level to manually override correspondent bank identifiers on a compliance filing. Lorne himself, who hadn't touched a compliance form in 3 years, and Victor Gauthier. Lorne pulled up the system access logs on his laptop. Every override left a record: employee credentials, a timestamp, and a terminal designation. He filtered the past 14 months, 22 overrides, all from the same terminal, Victor's office, all logged between 10:45 and midnight, all credentialed to Victor's login. Lorne pushed back from his desk slowly. His chair rolled until the window stopped it. 34 floors down, University Avenue glittered in the rain that had started falling, sometime in the last hour, the kind of fine Toronto rain that you don't notice until you're already soaked. 12 years. 12 years he'd trusted Victor Gauthier with everything. The quarterly board presentations, the investor relationships, the compliance architecture that was supposed to make Wentworth bulletproof. Victor had been the first person Lorne called when the irregularities surfaced in the external audit. Victor was the one who said, "I'll get to the bottom of it." Victor was the one who sat across from Kevin Addo in a termination meeting and told a 24-year-old kid that his career in financial services was finished. Lorne pulled Kevin's personnel file, terminated, reason cited, suspected involvement in financial misrepresentation, signed by Victor Gauthier. No formal investigation, no review board, no evidence beyond Victor's word, and an access log that Victor himself had the authority to edit. Kevin Addo, first person in his family to work in Bay Street finance. Finance degree from York, graduated top of his cohort. Hired at 22, let go at 24. Victor had ended that career with one signature and a quiet conversation with 2 other firms that made sure Kevin couldn't place anywhere else. And there it was. Lorne thought about Darlene's face in the elevator. Calm. No anger. Not 1 degree of performance. Just a woman saying what she knew to be true and trusting that it would land. How long had she known? Down on the 28th floor, Victor Gauthier was behind a locked office door with his personal laptop open and his phone in his hand. The paper shredder on his credenza was running. He fed documents through it one at a time, methodically, the way a careful does things. Not fast, not panicked, just steady. His call connected on the 2nd ring. Move the Pinnacle account by morning, all of it. Tertiary routing only. Delete the access keys when it clears. He hung up. Made a 2nd call, the Cayman position. Close it. Transfer to the Luxembourg account. Don't use the primary. He wasn't sweating. His hands were perfectly still. Victor Gauthier was not a man who panicked. He was a man who planned, and his plans had plans inside them. There was a property in Portugal no one at Wentworth knew existed. There were 2 other passports in a safety deposit box at a King Street bank branch. There were exit routes he'd been constructing quietly for 2 years, because Victor Gauthier had always known this day might come, and he'd made sure that when it did, he'd be the one who decided what came next. He opened his laptop and pulled up Darlene's HR file. Darlene O.C. Wainwright. Night maintenance. Hired 2016. Performance record. Clean. No complaints. No commendations either, because people like Victor Gauthier don't commend people like Darlene O.C. Wainwright. They just don't see them. He typed a termination notice. Cause: unauthorized access to restricted executive documentation, potential breach of confidential financial materials. Effective date: immediately. Badge deactivated upon submission. He filed it. Then he opened a draft email to 3 members of the board, people he'd been cultivating carefully, lunches and whiskey, and the particular flattery that powerful men receive so rarely they almost can't resist it when it's offered with the right kind of discretion. The subject line read, confidential. Leadership continuity concerns. The body of the email was careful, compassionate even. Suggestions about Lorne's state of mind, the stress of the audit, the possibility that someone in his position, under this kind of pressure, might not be the steadiest hand for what came next. Victor read it over once, sent it. He leaned back, looked at the ceiling. By tomorrow afternoon, the board would be quietly discussing an interim transition. Victor would step in. The investigation would lose momentum. The money would be offshore and moving, and the only person who'd said anything that mattered tonight, a woman with a mop and a cracked screen Samsung, would be gone before her next scheduled shift. He'd thought of everything. There was one thing Victor Gauthier had not thought of. At 1:47 in the morning, Lorne Whitaker took the service elevator to the basement. He had never been in this part of the building. Not once in 14 years. The basement hallway was concrete and fluorescent lights, and a smell like industrial cleaner and the ghost of 100 microwaved lunches. The overhead fixtures buzzed at a frequency that seemed designed to remind you how far you were from the 34th floor. He found the staff break room at the end of the hall, a plastic folding table, 4 chairs that didn't match, a vending machine that shuddered every 45 seconds for reasons no one had ever bothered to investigate, a microwave with a broken clock, a corkboard on the wall with a bus schedule and a notice about the Christmas party from 3 years ago that no one had taken down. Darlene was sitting at the table with her thermos and her David Chilton paperback and an expression that said she was not particularly surprised to see him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Lorne pulled out the chair across from her. It made a sound against the floor that was embarrassing in a room this quiet. He sat down. He looked. He knew. Completely ridiculous. A $1,500 suit under a vending machine that shuddered every 45 seconds. "You were right," he said. "The identifiers don't match. 22 transfers, all overridden from Victor's terminal, all credentialed to Victor's login, all between 10:45 and midnight." Darlene closed her book, set it on the table. "I know. How?" He said it quietly, not accusingly. Genuinely. "How do you know any of this?" She took a breath, and then she told him. The MBA from Queen's University, School of Business, class of 2001. The forensic accounting practice she'd built in Hamilton over 8 years, the one that didn't survive the financial crisis, and the client who owed her firm enough money that when he went under, she went under with him. Her husband Maurice, who'd had a stroke in 2019 and needed full-time support for 2 years, and the maintenance job she'd taken because it had benefits and a schedule that let her be home by 7 in the morning when the home care worker arrived. 9 years of cleaning Victor Gauthier's office. 9 years of watching him shred documents at midnight, of finding wire confirmation pages in the recycling bin that should have gone through the shredder but hadn't quite made it, of watching USB drives appear on his bookshelf on Monday and disappear by Thursday, of listening from the hallway outside his closed door to phone calls he made when he thought the floor was empty, which it was, except for the woman pushing the cleaning cart he'd never once looked at. "I'm not blind," she said, "and I went to Queen's, Mr. Whitaker. I know what a correspondent bank identifier is." He stared at her the way a man stares at something he should have seen a long time ago. "Why didn't you say something?" His voice wasn't defensive. It was the voice of a man genuinely trying to understand his own failure. "Why didn't you come to me?" Darlene almost smiled. "Almost. To you? The CEO? About the COO?" She picked up her thermos and set it down again, a small, quiet gesture. Who was going to believe the overnight maintenance worker? And Victor would have known exactly where the information came from. "There's no other candidate on this floor at midnight." Silence. Lorne looked at the table. "There's something else," Darlene said. "Kevin Addo, the analyst Victor let go. He didn't do this. Victor constructed a paper trail and used Kevin as the exit route. I've watched Victor build these things for 4 years. I know what it looks like." "I know," Lorne said quietly. Then you know what Kevin needs." Darlene leaned forward slightly. Her voice was measured. She wasn't asking. She was stating a condition. His job back, full back pay, and a public acknowledgement of what happened to him. Not a settlement with an NDA attached. Public. Lorne didn't hesitate. Not for a second. They shook hands across the plastic table. the CEO of Wentworth Financial and the woman who cleaned his office at midnight under the yellow light of a room that shuddered every 45 seconds. By 3 in the morning, they had a plan. By 4, Lorne had reached a forensic accountant that Darlene recommended, a former colleague from her Hamilton practice, a woman named Dr. Adana Ferreira, who answered her phone at 4 a.m. without complaint and had her laptop open within 7 minutes. By 5, Lorne was on the phone with a contact at the Ontario Securities Commission. The emergency board meeting was already scheduled for 8. Victor had no idea what was coming. The morning came in low and gray over the lake, the way Toronto mornings come in November. Not dramatic, just present, the city gradually materializing out of the dark the way it always does. The CN Tower first, then the office towers, then the streets below. By 7:30, the 34th floor of Wentworth Financial was awake and dressed and smelling of fresh coffee, and the particular tension of people who know something has shifted but don't yet know which direction. The board members arrived between 7:40 and 7:58, 8 of them, dark coats, careful faces, the calibrated reserve of people who have learned to wait for information before committing to an expression. At the far end of the boardroom table sat Dr. Adana Ferreira, forensic accountant, with a laptop and a stack of printed documentation that represented 4 hours of continuous work and 22 years of professional practice. Beside her, standing against the wall with his hands clasped in front of him, a man in a dark suit whose government ID sat clipped to his belt like a small, significant fact. OSC investigator. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. The board members noticed. Glances moved across the table like a current. At 7:59, Victor Gauthier walked in. He looked perfect. Of course he did. Navy suit, silver tie, hair combed back with the kind of precision that a man like Victor considered basic professionalism. He was carrying his leather portfolio. He shook 2 hands, poured himself a coffee, settled into his usual chair. Right side of the table, second from the head, the chair he'd sat in for 12 years. He didn't notice Dr. Ferreira, didn't look twice at the man by the wall. Morning, everyone. His voice was easy. The voice of a man who is accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room. Lorne, do you want to start, or should I walk the board through the continuity framework I'll take it from here, Victor. Lorne's voice was different, flattened. The kind of calm that doesn't cost anything anymore because every decision that needed to be made has already been made. He pressed a button on the conference table. The screen at the end of the room lit up. The slide was plain. White background. Black text. Wire transfer authorization. Pinnacle Meridian Holdings. Correspondent bank identifier discrepancy. Victor's coffee cup paused halfway between the table and his mouth. Lorne walked through it the way Darlene had laid it out for him at the plastic table 4 hours earlier. 22 transfers. 22 compliance overrides. All originating from Victor's terminal. All credentialed to Victor's login. All between 10:45 and midnight, the hours when Victor had assumed no one was watching. Dr. Ferreira took over. She pulled up the incorporation records. Pinnacle Meridian Holdings. Lakeshore Capital Partners, Sterling Ridge LLC, all registered within a 9-week window. All connected to the same network of offshore structures, accounts in the Cayman Islands, a private banking arrangement in Luxembourg, a holding company in Malta that connected, through 2 layers of registered agents, to a single beneficial owner. She turned her laptop toward the table. The name on the screen was Victor Jean-Pierre Gauthier. The boardroom went so quiet you could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Victor set his coffee down. His face hadn't changed. The smile was gone, but the architecture of it remained, like a building that's lost its windows but still has all its walls. This is absurd, he said it calmly. He was still performing calm. Lorne, you've been under tremendous pressure. I understand that. But to take a maintenance worker's interpretation of financial documents and, there's more. Lorne pressed another button. Security footage. Timestamp. 11:09 p.m. the previous evening. Victor's office. The footage showed him feeding documents into his shredder, one at a time, precise, unhurried. Then his phone in his hand. A call that lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The OSSC investigator confirmed they had already subpoenaed the call records from both phones. Victor's composure cracked. Not much, not visibly to someone who wasn't paying attention, but a small tightening at the corner of his mouth. A single involuntary glance at the boardroom door. The investigator shifted his weight. Victor saw it. This is being manufactured. His voice was a half step higher than it had been. The overnight worker, she was on that floor without authorization. She clearly had access to documents. This is a setup, Lorne. You have to see that. You're going to take the word of a cleaning woman over 12 years of. The door opened. Darlene Osai Wainwright walked in, not in her coveralls. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, dark slacks, a cream blouse. Her own clothes, not borrowed from anyone. She'd gone home at 6 and come back. She sat down at the table, pulled a chair right up to the boardroom table, like someone who had sat at boardroom tables before. Because she had. For 8 years in Hamilton. Victor stared at her. His mouth opened. He closed it. Darlene opened the folder in front of her. She walked through the financial trail with the precision of someone who had spent 22 years looking for exactly this kind of thing. Correspondent, bank, identifiers, override timestamps, the formation sequence of the shell companies, the relationship between compliance filing dates and transfer execution dates, the personnel action timeline of Kevin Addo's termination and its correlation with the acceleration of transfer volume in the same month. She cited Canadian securities regulations by number. She referenced the relevant sections of the criminal code. She used technical language that 2 of the board members were quietly typing into their phones to look up. When she finished, the room was silent. Victor looked around the table. Every face was stone. 12 years of working this room, and there wasn't a single person looking back at him with anything he could use. The man who had called her a cleaning woman 11 hours ago had just spent 18 minutes dismantling everything he'd spent 4 years building. Darlene didn't gloat, didn't pause for effect. She simply closed the folder, set it on the table, and looked at Victor with the same expression she'd had in the elevator, steady, clear, a woman who said what she needed to say and is now finished saying it. Victor stood up. He buttoned his jacket, picked up his leather portfolio. He walked toward the boardroom door like a man who has decided the performance isn't over yet, like confidence alone could undo what 17 people in this room had just witnessed. He reached for the handle. The door opened before he touched it. 2 people in dark suits, RCMP Commercial Crime Division. They stood in the doorway with the contained authority of people who do not need to announce themselves. Victor Gauthier, his hand was still reaching for a handle that wasn't there anymore. You're under arrest. Fraud over $5,000. Breach of trust. Obstruction of justice. You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay. The rest came in pieces. The formal caution. The click of handcuffs. That small metallic sound that is the same everywhere in the world, in any building, the sound that changes everything that comes after it. Victor tried once more. He turned his head toward the board. His voice had gone thin. The architecture of the smile was gone now. This is a misunderstanding. Everything I did, I was protecting the firm. Lorne, you know that. You know what I was doing. Tell them. Nobody at the table said a word. Lorne looked at Victor, no anger on his face. Just the exhaustion of a man who has finally seen something he should have seen years ago, and knows he has no one to blame for the not seeing but himself. The officers walked Victor out of the boardroom, down the hall, past the glass offices where his name was still on a plaque, into the elevator, down 34 floors, through the lobby, the same lobby where he'd told the security desk to file an incident report on a woman with a cleaning cart, across the marble floor, through the glass doors, and into the gray Toronto morning. A dark SUV was waiting. The door closed. It drove away down University Avenue and disappeared into the morning traffic like it was nothing at all. Back on the 34th floor, the board voted without discussion. Unanimous. Victor Gauthier removed, terminated with cause. All accounts and credentials suspended effective immediately. Legal counsel directed to support the federal prosecution and pursue full civil recovery. Lorne walked out of the boardroom and down the hall to his office. He closed the door, picked up his phone, dialed a number he'd found in Kevin's personnel file. It rang 5 times. Hello? The voice was young, careful. The voice of someone who has learned to be careful about unknown numbers. Kevin, this is Lorne Whitaker. Silence on the other end, the kind of silence that has weight. I owe you an apology, Lorne said. Not a private one, not a settlement agreement with conditions, a public one. What happened to you? What Victor did to you? I had the tools to see it, and I didn't look. That's on me. Kevin didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was uneven. Mr. Whitaker, I've been at my parents' house for 4 months. I can't get an interview. I can't. My dad keeps asking me what I did wrong, and I didn't do anything wrong. I know that now. Lorne closed his eyes. I'm offering you your position back. Full back pay from the date of your termination, and a promotion to senior financial analyst. If you want it, Kevin broke. The sound that came through the phone wasn't words. Just the sound of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and someone has finally come to help carry it. Lorne stayed on the line. Didn't rush him. Didn't fill the quiet with corporate language. Just held the phone and let Kevin be a person for a minute. When he hung up, he walked back into the hallway. Darlene was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows at the end of the hall, looking out at the city. The morning had clarified while they'd been in that boardroom. The lake was visible now to the south, flat and gray-green under the November sky. The CN Tower stood the way it always stands, patient, enormous, uninterested in drama. You saved this firm, Lorne said. Darlene shook her head slowly. She didn't turn from the window. I told you to check the numbers. He stood beside her. 2 people at a window, looking at the same city from a floor neither of them had ever expected to share. For the first time in 4 months, Lorne Whitaker could breathe. The story didn't end in that boardroom. It barely started there. Within 72 hours, the RCMP Commercial Crime Division had opened a full investigation, and the OSCs had issued an asset freeze order covering every account and property connected to Victor Gauthier's name. The forensic team that Dr. Ferreira brought in started with the 3 shell companies the board had seen on the screen. They ended up with 9. The money wasn't $43 million. It was $61 million, moved over 5 years, not the 14 months that the initial audit had surfaced. Victor had been doing this since his 2nd year as KO, skimming in amounts calibrated to look like rounding discrepancies on a quarterly reconciliation. Slow, patient, precise, the way a careful man does things. But the money was only part of what the investigators found. On Victor's personal laptop, in a folder labeled Administrative Reference, there was a collection of files that had nothing to do with administration. Background checks, photographs taken from a distance, reports prepared by a private investigator out of Mississauga, all of them targeting Wentworth employees. Anyone who asked too many questions, anyone who moved too quickly through the organization, anyone Victor had decided posed a risk to the thing he was building inside the thing he was supposed to be protecting. Kevin Addo was in the folder. So were 3 other employees. Victor had quietly removed over 4 years. Performance documentation that had been manufactured, references that had been quietly undermined, the specific, patient work of a man who needed certain people out of the building before they got close enough to see what he was doing. Darlene was in the folder too. Victor had flagged her 8 months ago. The note attached to her file said, Maintenance staff, 34th floor overnight. Observed lingering near executive offices. Review termination options. First available pretext. First available pretext had arrived at 11:22 on a Tuesday night. Victor just hadn't accounted for what happens in the time between the pretext and the morning. The private investigator cooperated with the RCMP within 48 hours of his own arrest. Emails, invoices, photographs. All of it pointing back to Victor, to the offshore accounts, to a network that had been assembled over 5 years, with the kind of patience that is almost impressive if you don't think about what it was for. The media caught the story on a Thursday. A business reporter at the Globe and Mail broke it first, tipped by someone with knowledge of the OSC filings. The headline went up at 10:47 at night. The overnight maintenance worker who exposed a $61 million fraud at a Toronto financial firm. By Friday morning, every major outlet had it. The CBC, CTV, Toronto Star, National Post, BNN, Bloomberg. Across the border, the Wall Street Journal ran a piece. The Financial Times had it by Friday afternoon. The photograph that ran everywhere wasn't one anyone had arranged. It was a photo Lorne had taken on his phone in the boardroom that morning, before anyone had thought about optics or communication strategy. Darlene at the table, folder in front of her, in her charcoal blazer, in a room she belonged in. The response was not what the financial press expected. It went past the business pages. Someone on social media posted the image with 5 words. She knew for 9 years. Within 24 hours, it was the most shared post in Canada. Within 48, it had crossed into the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia. People posted their own stories. Security guards, hospital orderlies, administrative assistants, warehouse workers. The people who are present in rooms where decisions are made, who see things they're not supposed to see, who have spent years knowing something that no one in authority was positioned or willing to hear. Lorne held a press conference 5 days after the arrest. He stood at a podium with the Wentworth Financial logo behind him and spoke without notes. He credited Darlene by name. He told the full story. He did not soften his own failure. The 12 years of trust he'd extended to Victor without verification, the 24-year-old analyst he'd allowed to be destroyed without asking a single question, the 9 years he'd walked past a woman every night without learning her name. Kevin Addo stood to his right on the podium. Lorne turned to him and apologized in front of every camera in that room. Then he turned to Darlene, who was standing off to the side in the same charcoal blazer, and said, "This woman tried to do the right thing in the only way that was available to her, and the first thing we did was call security." Victor Gauthier's trial opened 16 weeks later, federal court, downtown Toronto. 3 weeks, 49 witnesses, 11,000 pages of financial documentation entered into evidence. The defense argued misappropriation of funds for undisclosed investment purposes, planned for eventual disclosure. They argued that Darlene's observations were inadmissible as the testimony of an unqualified financial professional. They argued procedural irregularities in the arrest. The jury was out for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Guilty, all charges. 9 counts of fraud over $5,000. 4 counts of breach of trust. 2 counts of obstruction of justice. 1 count of criminal organization. The judge noted in sentencing that what distinguished this case wasn't simply the scale of the fraud. It was the system inside the fraud, the deliberate, sustained targeting of employees on the basis of perceived threat, the destruction of careers, the construction of false evidence, all of it enabled by a culture where the people most likely to see what was happening were also the people least likely to be believed. She sentenced Victor Gauthier to 19 years in federal institution, full restitution of $61 million, all assets seized, his properties in Portugal, his accounts in Luxembourg and the Cayman Islands, a ski property in Whistler no one at Wentworth had known about, a car collection stored in a climate-controlled facility in Etobicoke, all of it gone. 6 months later, Darlene O.C. Wainwright walked into the Wentworth Financial Tower through the front entrance, not the service door. The front entrance. The glass doors that faced University Avenue, with the lobby that had the security desk and the marble floors and the ficus tree that someone had been keeping alive for years in the corner by the window. "Morning, Ms. O.C. Wainwright. Ms. O.C. Wainwright." Lorne had offered her a corner office, VP of Risk and Compliance. A compensation package, she would have said, was a number from a different life. She turned it down. What she accepted was a consulting arrangement. 2 days a week, reviewing Wentworth's internal compliance systems, training junior analysts, building the kind of review infrastructure that catches things before they become 14 months of forensic accounting and a federal trial. She wasn't interested in a title. She was interested in the work. The rest of her consulting fee, everything above what she and Maurice needed, went to a bursary fund at the Queen Smith School of Business. The Maurice and Darlene O.C. Wainwright Bursary, for first-generation students pursuing degrees in accounting and finance. 2 recipients in the first year, 5 in the second. She did not speak to a single journalist. The Globe and Mail called 11 times. CBC reached out through 3 different producers. A documentary company sent a formal proposal to her home address. She declined all of it. I didn't do it for the cameras, she told Lorne once, sitting at the same plastic table in the basement break room where she'd told him to check the numbers. I did it because I knew what I was looking at, and I knew it was wrong. He nodded. She poured herself a cup of tea from her thermos, opened The Wealthy Barber to the page she'd left off at, and that was the end of that conversation. Kevin Addo came back to Wentworth on a Monday in February. He walked in through the front doors with his shoulders straight and his head up, and a quiet kind of gravity that wasn't there before. The kind that comes from having lost something and found it again and knowing the difference. He stopped at the security desk and asked where he could find Darlene O.C. Wainwright. He found her in a small office on the 12th floor. No window, no walnut furniture. Just a table, a laptop, a whiteboard with 3 columns of numbers, and a stack of compliance forms she was working through with a junior analyst who looked about 22 and very focused. Kevin stood in the doorway for a moment before she looked up. You didn't know me, he said. We'd never met. Why did you fight for me? Darlene looked at him for a moment, set her pen down, because I know what it looks like when someone good gets taken apart by someone who's afraid of them. She paused, and because I've been in that room before. Not your room, mine, but the same room. Kevin nodded. He didn't trust himself to say anything else. He went to work. His first project as senior financial analyst was a proposal for a formal internal disclosure system, a structured, protected channel through which any employee at any level could flag financial irregularities without fear of retaliation or exposure. Anonymous intake, independent review, guaranteed response within 30 days. He called it the O.C. Wainwright Protocol. Darlene told him that was completely unnecessary, and he should name it something else. Kevin told her, respectfully, that he was going to name it whatever he wanted. She let it go. Lorne Whitaker rebuilt Wentworth Financial slowly, honestly. He replaced 3 board members, brought in a new COO with a background in public sector oversight, opened the books to independent quarterly audits, created a board-level risk committee with a mandate to function independently of executive leadership. He and Darlene had coffee most Thursday mornings at a place on Queen Street West with good tea and tables that were slightly too small. Lorne always tried to get there first so he could order before she arrived. She always arrived first anyway. He paid sometimes. She let him. Victor Gauthier served the first years of his sentence at a federal correctional institution in Ontario. His name became a case study. The compliance failure, the culture of assumed authority. The systems that allow a careful man to steal from the inside for 5 years because everyone in a position to notice has already been taught not to look. A paper published by the Rotman School of Management was titled 18 Months After the Trial, Correspondent Bank Identifiers and the Cost of Institutional Blindness. Victor had 20 years to think about what he'd built and what it had cost. And somewhere on a quiet street in Hamilton, Maurice O.C. Wainwright was sitting in the living room of the house he and Darlene had lived in for 23 years, the afternoon light coming through the front window, the way it does in November when the leaves are down and the light gets low and long, reading the newspaper, not thinking about boardrooms or courtrooms or any of it at all. Just home. Just the afternoon. Just the particular and unspectacular grace of a life that is against all reasonable expectation, still intact.